I'm Diane Reynolds, 58 years old, from Boston. The doorbell rang that Tuesday afternoon, revealing Brandon and Heather standing there with unusually tense expressions. "Mom, we need to talk about something important," my son said flatly. Little did I know their financial matter would destroy everything. When Brandon revealed Heather's $300,000 debt and stated matter-of-factly that I needed to pay it, my blood ran cold. I stared into the demanding eyes of the son I'd sacrificed everything for as he delivered his ultimatum: "You'll pay it, or you'll never see us again. Choose wisely, Mom." Before I begin my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to make a difficult decision involving family. This journey gets intense, and I want you all along for every shocking turn. The irony wasn't lost on me that day. As a retired financial advisor who'd spent 30 years helping others secure their futures, I now faced financial ruin at the hands of my own son. I'd built my career from nothing after my husband Jack died unexpectedly when Brandon was only 8. Cancer took him in just 7 months, leaving me a 34-year-old widow with a mortgage, minimal savings, and a young boy who'd just lost his father. Those early years were brutal. I worked 60-hour weeks at the financial firm while juggling Brandon's school activities and my grief. We downsized to a small apartment, I sold our second car, and I wore the same professional outfits for years, carefully maintaining them. But Brandon never went without. I made sure he had good clothes, participated in sports, attended summer camps, and eventually got the laptop he needed for college. My retirement plans kept getting pushed back as college tuition, his first apartment's security deposit, and helping with his first car took priority. "He'll appreciate the sacrifices when he's older," my sister Ruth used to say when she saw how exhausted I was. "He'll understand what you've done for him." But looking back, I realize I might have done too much. Brandon never had an after-school job. When his friends worked summer positions, I let him focus on building his resume with unpaid internships that I subsidized. The Christmas he was 16, while I was still paying off Jack's medical bills, I somehow found the money for the gaming computer he insisted would be an investment for his future in digital media. The signs were there early, but I ignored them. When he called from college needing money to cover textbooks but posted spring break photos from Cancun the next month. When he graduated and took a job paying half what he could have earned because it was better for his personal brand. When he moved into an apartment he couldn't afford in the trendy part of the city while complaining about his student loans. Then he met Heather 5 years ago. She was beautiful, charming, and worked in fashion marketing. Something about her made me uneasy from our first meeting, perhaps how she examined my home with calculating eyes or asked pointed questions about my retirement plans. But Brandon was smitten, and I wanted him to be happy. Their wedding was a financial nightmare disguised as a dream. What started as a modest ceremony somehow morphed into a 150-guest extravaganza at a waterfront venue. "Mom, we'll only get married once," Brandon had pleaded. "And Heather's parents can't contribute much." I emptied a significant portion of my non-retirement savings to give them their perfect day, including the honeymoon in Italy. After the wedding, their lifestyle became increasingly lavish. Their social media showed expensive restaurants, designer clothes for Heather, and vacations I knew they couldn't afford on their salaries. When I gently asked about their financial planning during a dinner visit, Brandon became defensive. "We're fine, Mom. Not everyone needs to pinch pennies like you do. We believe in enjoying life now." The financial emergencies started about 2 years ago. First, it was help with a plumbing disaster in their condo. Then Brandon's car needed unexpected repairs. Later, Heather lost an expensive piece of jewelry that wasn't insured. Each time, the request came with promises of repayment that never materialized. Family gatherings became increasingly rare. Brandon always had excuses, work commitments, Heather not feeling well, prior plans with friends. When they did visit, conversations felt strained. I noticed Heather's growing collection of designer handbags and Brandon's new golf clubs while they complained about the cost of living. The last Christmas before everything fell apart, Brandon and Heather arrived 3 hours late to family dinner at Ruth's house. Heather wore a brand new coat that still had the Nordstrom tag partially visible, which Ruth later told me cost over $2,000. Throughout dinner, Brandon checked his phone constantly, and they left immediately after dessert. As they walked to their car, I overheard Heather say, "That wasn't so bad. Now we can go to the real party." I remember standing in Ruth's driveway, watching their taillights disappear, feeling a heaviness in my chest. Something was very wrong with my son, and I didn't know how to fix it. I just didn't realize then how drastically things were about to change. The afternoon Brandon and Heather showed up unannounced at my door, marked the beginning of the end. I invited them in, made coffee, and listened as Brandon cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, we're in a bit of a situation," he began, not meeting my eyes. "Heather has accumulated some debt, and we need help clearing it." When I asked how much, the number hit me like a physical blow. $300,000. "How is that even possible?" I asked, my financial advisor brain immediately calculating how long it would take someone to accumulate that level of debt. Heather stared at her manicured nails while Brandon pulled out a folder. "It's complicated," he said, spreading papers across my kitchen table. "Credit cards, mainly. Some personal loans. And, well, Heather had some gambling issues for a while." The breakdown was staggering. 8 maxed-out credit cards, 3 personal loans, 2 payday lenders charging criminal interest rates, and a significant gambling debt to what appeared to be an offshore casino. As I examined the statements, I noticed most purchases were luxury items: designer clothing, high-end makeup, expensive restaurants, and weekend getaways. "We thought we could manage it," Brandon continued, his voice taking on the rehearsed tone I recognized from his college days when he'd call asking for money. "But the interest is killing us. We can't even make the minimum payments anymore." Heather finally spoke, her eyes welling with tears that seemed to appear on command. "I know I made mistakes, Diane. I've been going to therapy for my shopping addiction, but we're drowning here." "What about bankruptcy?" I asked. "Or debt consolidation?" Brandon's face hardened. "We can't do bankruptcy. It would ruin our credit for a decade, and we'd lose the condo." "You might lose it anyway if you can't pay these debts," I pointed out. "That's why we need your help," Brandon said, leaning forward. "You've always been there for me, Mom. You have that retirement fund and the equity in your house. You could help us clear this and start fresh." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Brandon, that money is my security for the next 20 or 30 years. I don't have an income anymore." "You could go back to work," he suggested casually, as if asking me to pick up milk from the store or downsize to something smaller. "You don't need that 3-bedroom house now that I'm gone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The house I'd worked so hard to afford after years in that tiny apartment. The retirement I'd sacrificed for and carefully planned. "I raised you alone after your father died," I said, my voice shaking. "I worked 60-hour weeks for years. I put you through college debt-free. I paid for your wedding. I've helped whenever you asked. But this would leave me with nothing." Heather's tears dried instantly. "We're not asking for everything," she said coldly. "Just enough to clear the debt." Brandon's demeanor changed then, his face hardening into something I didn't recognize. What kind of mother refuses to help her only child? "After everything we've been through, I'm not refusing to help," I clarified. "I'm saying I can't give you $300,000 without destroying my future." "You're being selfish," he snapped. "This is your grandchildren's future too. We can't start a family with this hanging over us." The argument escalated quickly. Brandon mentioned all the sacrifices he'd supposedly made for me, living nearby instead of taking a job in Chicago after college, a job he'd never actually been offered, calling me weekly, calls that had dwindled to monthly at best, including me in holiday plans, where I was clearly an afterthought. "I need time to think about this," I said finally, overwhelmed by the situation. "There's no time," Brandon insisted. "Some of these debts have gone to collection. They're threatening legal action." "Then I definitely need to consult my attorney before making any decisions," I replied. That's when the ultimatum came. "Fine. If you won't help us, that's your choice. But choices have consequences. If you don't help with this, we're done. You won't see us again. No visits, no calls, no future grandchildren. Nothing." After they left, I sat stunned at my kitchen table among the scattered financial statements. My phone pinged with a message from my sister. "Did Brandon talk to you? He told me you promised to help with their financial troubles." He seemed so relieved. Then another message arrived from my cousin Janet. "So generous of you to help Brandon and Heather. They told everyone at the family reunion you'd agreed to pay off their debt. You're such a wonderful mother. The realization hit me hard. They had been telling everyone I'd already agreed to help before even asking me, creating pressure from all sides. They had orchestrated this ambush perfectly. The morning after Brandon and Heather's bombshell, I called in a favor from Malcolm, my former colleague at the financial firm who specialized in debt resolution. I emailed him copies of the statements they'd left with me, asking for his professional opinion. Malcolm's call came just 3 hours later. Diane, something doesn't add up here. These statements show approximately $300,000 in debt, but based on the account numbers, there appear to be additional accounts not included in these documents. And the timeline of some of these debts doesn't match what your son told you. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Several of these credit cards were opened within the last 6 months, yet they're already maxed out. And there's evidence of balance transfers between accounts, which is often a sign of credit card kiting, opening new cards to pay off old ones. Malcolm helped me run a soft credit check on myself, something I should have done regularly but had neglected since retirement. What we found left me speechless. 2 credit cards had been opened in my name within the past year, cards I knew nothing about. A personal loan for $40,000 with my name as the primary borrower, with Brandon as a co-signer. The address on all these accounts was Brandon and Heather's condo. Identity theft? Malcolm said grimly. And given that it's your son, it complicates things legally. The actual debt total, when everything was accounted for, exceeded $400,000. The gambling debts were primarily Brandon's, not Heather's as he'd claimed. There was evidence of expensive electronics purchases, sports betting, and cash advances, not just Heather's shopping addiction. I felt physically ill. While I'd been carefully budgeting my retirement, counting my pennies and worrying about making my savings last, my son had been stealing my identity and racking up fraudulent debt in my name. Armed with this information, I arranged to meet Brandon alone at a coffee shop. He arrived looking irritated at the unnecessary meeting when we'd already discussed everything. I placed the credit reports in front of him. Want to explain this? His face went through several emotions: surprise, anger, and then a calculated blankness. You weren't supposed to find out about those yet, he finally said. Not denial. Not shock that someone had stolen my identity. Just annoyance that I'd discovered it sooner than planned. So you admit to opening accounts in my name without my permission? Do you understand that's a felony? Brandon scoffed. Come on, Mom. It's not like that. You've always said everything you have will be mine eventually. I just needed to access some of it early. By committing fraud? You're being dramatic. It's not fraud between family. I was going to tell you about those accounts when you agreed to help with the other debts. I realized then that the $300,000 they'd asked for initially was just the beginning. They'd planned to reveal the additional fraudulent debt after I'd already committed to helping, trapping me further. I want you to close those accounts immediately and transfer the balances to your name, I said. Brandon laughed. With what credit? We're maxed out everywhere. That's the whole point, Mom. You need to help us fix this. Or what? You'll keep committing identity theft? His expression hardened. Or we'll do what we said. You'll never see us again. And think about how it will look if you report your own son for fraud. Everyone will know what a vindictive person you really are. The threats continued. He'd already told his extended family that I'd promised financial help. Heather's parents had called my sister Ruth, expressing their gratitude for my generosity and praising what a wonderful mother-in-law I was. My cousin Janet had posted on Facebook thanking me for coming through for Brandon and Heather in their time of need. Ruth initially took Brandon's side, calling me to say, "They're young and made mistakes, Diane. That's what family is for. Helping each other through tough times." But when I showed her the credit reports and the fraudulent accounts, her attitude changed completely. "This isn't a mistake," she said, horrified. "This is calculated theft." From his own mother. The final blow came when Brandon called the next day. "By the way," he said casually, "if you're thinking of being difficult about this, remember that we're planning to start a family soon. Would you really want to be cut off from your grandchildren?" The blatant manipulation stunned me into silence. "Just think about it, Mom," he continued, mistaking my shock for consideration. Family should come first, right? We'll need your help even more when the baby comes. There was no baby, of course. Just another manipulation tactic. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, the house suddenly feeling very empty. The son I thought I knew had become a stranger, or perhaps I was finally seeing who he'd been all along. I woke at 6:17 a.m. to the sound of my kitchen cabinets closing. For a disoriented moment, I thought I'd dreamed it until I heard muffled voices downstairs. Heart pounding, I grabbed my robe and the baseball bat I'd kept under my bed since Jack died. Creeping down the stairs, I froze at the sight of Brandon and Heather in my kitchen, rifling through my drawers. A folder of financial documents lay open on the table. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded. They both jumped. Heather had the grace to look embarrassed, but Brandon's expression was defiant. "We needed to find your insurance policies and investment statements," he said, as if breaking into my home at dawn was perfectly reasonable. "You weren't being cooperative, and we need to know exactly what we're working with." "How did you get in?" Brandon dangled a key. "Made a copy last time we visited. For emergencies." The violation felt physical. My home, my safe space, invaded without permission by my own son. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Now, don't be dramatic, Mom," Brandon said, continuing to rifle through papers. "We're just trying to figure out solutions. The creditors are getting aggressive." I said, "Get out." "We've already promised the credit card companies we'd make a payment this week," Heather blurted, her voice high and panicky. "We told them you'd agreed to help." Brandon shot her an angry look. "Heather, shut up." "You what?" I felt dizzy with anger. "You promised my money to creditors without my consent?" Brandon stepped toward me, using his height advantage in a way that made me instinctively step back. This was a tactic I'd never seen from him before. Physical intimidation. "You owe us this," he hissed. "After everything I sacrificed growing up with just one parent, do you know what it was like for me, watching my friends with their normal families while I was stuck with just you?" His words cut deeper than he could know. The years of working myself to exhaustion, of going without so he could have what he needed, reduced to a burden he'd suffered through. "I gave you everything I could," I whispered. "Well, it wasn't enough," he snapped. "And now you can make it up to me. I want you both to leave. Now. Or I'm calling the police." Brandon laughed. "And tell them what? That your son has a key to your house? That we're looking at family financial documents?" "They won't care. They'll care about the identity theft and fraud," I countered. His face darkened. "You wouldn't dare. If you call the police, I swear we'll tell them you authorized everything. It'll be your word against ours. And we'll make sure everyone knows what you did. Tried to send your own son to jail over a misunderstanding. Get out of my house." I enunciated each word, gripping the baseball bat tighter. "Fine," Brandon said, grabbing several papers from my table. "But this isn't over. Our attorney says we have a case for promised financial support. You've established a pattern of helping us, and we have witnesses who'll testify you agreed to help with these debts." "Attorney? You can afford an attorney but not your credit card bills?" Heather smirked. "He's working on contingency. He gets paid when we get your money." They finally left. Brandon's parting shot lingering in the air. "You've got 48 hours to come up with the money, or our lawyer files the papers." After they left, I collapsed onto my kitchen floor, struggling to breathe. The panic attack lasted nearly 20 minutes, leaving me drained and disoriented. But something had shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodation and sacrifice had reached its breaking point. Just before midnight, my phone rang. It was my bank's fraud department. Someone had attempted to access my retirement accounts online, initiating a transfer of nearly $200,000 to an external account. The attempt had been flagged as suspicious because the security questions had been answered incorrectly after multiple tries. I knew exactly who was responsible. The bank representative helped me lock down all my accounts and place security freezes on my credit. As I sat in my dark kitchen afterward, I realized with perfect clarity I wasn't safe here anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, and possibly not physically. The son I'd raised was now a genuine threat to my well-being. This wasn't a temporary family disagreement. This was a coordinated, escalating campaign of financial abuse, and I needed to protect myself. The morning after the break-in, I made an appointment with Sarah Jenkins, an attorney specializing in elder law and financial abuse. I'd met her at a retirement planning seminar I'd conducted years earlier and remembered her sharp mind and no-nonsense approach. "What you're describing is criminal," Sarah said, after I'd explained everything. "Identity theft, breaking and entering, attempted theft from retirement accounts, and elder financial abuse." "Elder abuse?" "I'm only 58, I protested. Sarah smiled grimly. "In legal terms, many of these statutes apply to anyone over 55. And what they're doing fits the pattern perfectly. Using family relationships to manipulate, intimidate, and financially exploit you." She helped me file a police report about the identity theft and fraudulent accounts, making it clear I wasn't pressing charges against Brandon yet, just documenting the fraud to protect myself. We filed for restraining orders against both Brandon and Heather and sent cease and desist letters regarding the fraudulent accounts. "What about their threats of legal action?" I asked. "Could they really sue me for promised support?" "It's a nuisance lawsuit at best," Sarah assured me. "But defending against even frivolous lawsuits costs money and time. And given what you've told me about their behavior, they might be willing to drag you through lengthy court proceedings just to pressure you into settling." That afternoon, I made a decision. I needed to disappear, not forever, but long enough to protect my assets and develop a long-term plan. As a financial advisor, I'd occasionally helped clients restructure their finances after divorce or during identity theft recovery. I knew the steps. First, I opened new accounts at a small credit union across town where Brandon wouldn't think to look. I transferred the majority of my accessible funds, leaving just enough in my original accounts to avoid triggering automatic notifications about closed accounts. I researched areas where my retirement savings would stretch further than Boston. Small coastal towns in Maine kept appearing in my searches. Lower cost of living, tight-knit communities, and far enough away to provide safety but close enough that I could still see Ruth occasionally. I contacted a real estate agent about potentially listing my house but held off on making it official. Instead, I arranged for a 6-month rental in Rockport, Maine, a picturesque harbor town about 3 hours from Boston. I paid the full 6 months up front, using my maiden name, Diane Mitchell, for the lease. The logistics were overwhelming. Which possessions meant enough to take? Which documents were essential? I worked methodically through my house, packing one small box at a time and storing them in my garage where they wouldn't be noticeable if Brandon used his key again. I gathered birth certificates, insurance policies, my husband's death certificate, marriage license, property deeds, car title, and tax returns for the past 7 years. I photographed every room in my house for insurance purposes, documenting my possessions. The emotional aspects were harder. How do you leave behind the home where you raised your child? The garden you've tended for decades? The neighbors who've become friends? I found myself standing in Brandon's childhood bedroom, now my home office, touching the height mark still penciled on the doorframe. Where had things gone so wrong? Had I spoiled him? Failed to teach him important values? Or was there something I'd missed, some trauma or influence that had warped his sense of right and wrong? I'd never know. Not now. Brandon's messages grew increasingly threatening as the 48-hour deadline approached. At first, it was guilt. I can't believe my own mother would abandon me like this. Then manipulation. Heather's having anxiety attacks over this stress. Is that what you want for us? Finally, outright threats. You'll regret it if you make us take legal action. Everyone will know what kind of mother you really are. I didn't respond to any of them. The night before I planned to leave, I sat on my back porch watching fireflies in the garden. The same porch where I'd rocked baby Brandon during colicky nights. Where I'd helped him with science projects and college applications. Where Jack and I had planned our future together before cancer stole those dreams. I allowed myself to cry then, mourning not just my present losses but the future I'd imagined. Holiday gatherings with grandchildren, Sunday dinners with my son and his family, the comfort of knowing my only child would be there for me in my final years. At 4:30 the next morning, I loaded my small SUV with the essential boxes. My cat, Professor, protested his carrier until I let him ride on the passenger seat instead. I took one last walk through the house, touching door frames and countertops, saying goodbye. As I pulled out of my driveway in the pre-dawn light, the mix of emotions was overwhelming. Grief at what I was leaving behind, fear of the unknown ahead, but also a surprising sense of liberation. For the first time since Brandon was born, every decision I made would be entirely for myself. The sun rose as I drove north on I-95, painting the sky in pinks and oranges. Professor settled into sleep beside me, and I put on an audiobook I'd been meaning to hear for years. As Boston disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the heavy mantle of being Brandon's safety net, his backstop, his perpetual bailout. 6 hours later, including stops for coffee and cat needs, I arrived in Rockport. My small rental cottage overlooked the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed on the afternoon tide. The landlady, a widow named Martha who lived next door, welcomed me with a loaf of homemade bread and a local guidebook. "It's a friendly town," she assured me. "People will be curious about you at first, but they respect privacy too. Whatever you're running from, you'll find peace here." I unpacked my car, set up Professor's litter box and food, and made the bed with sheets that still smelled like home. Then I sat on the small porch with a cup of tea, watching the water and breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in months. I was terrified. I was free. I was starting over at 58, and somehow, despite everything, I felt a flicker of hope. Rockport embraced me with a gentleness I hadn't expected. I settled into a routine: morning walks along the harbor, afternoons arranging my small cottage, evenings reading books I'd put off for years. Professor adjusted quickly, claiming the sunny windowsill overlooking the garden as his domain. 2 weeks after arriving, I gathered my courage and visited the local bookstore, Harbor Books. The owner, a gray-haired woman named Elaine, was arranging a display of summer reading when I entered. "Just browsing," I said when she greeted me. "Take your time," she replied. "Coffee's free for browsers. Tea too, if you prefer." I found myself lingering for nearly 2 hours, eventually striking up a conversation with Elaine about a mystery novel we'd both enjoyed. When I mentioned I was new in town, her eyes lit up. "We're always looking for help here, especially someone who knows books. Interested in a few shifts? Nothing formal, just when you feel like company." It was perfect. A small income to supplement my retirement and a way to meet people without sharing too much of my story. I became Diane, the bookstore lady, offering recommendations and arranging displays 3 afternoons a week. I told people I was a widow from Boston seeking a quieter life, which was true enough. No one pressed for details. Meanwhile, the life I'd left behind refused to stay quiet. Brandon's calls and messages continued, shifting from threats to fake concern. "Mom, everyone's worried about you. Ruth says you're not answering her either. Are you okay? Just let us know you're safe." I'd told Ruth I needed space and would contact her when I was ready. She respected my decision, though I knew it worried her. I called her from a prepaid phone after I'd been in Rockport a month, swearing her to secrecy about my location. "He's telling everyone you're having a mental breakdown," she reported. "That you've been acting erratically, making strange financial decisions, and might be developing dementia. He's talking about pursuing guardianship." The calculated cruelty took my breath away. "Guardianship? I'm completely competent." "I know that," Ruth assured me. "And so does anyone who actually knows you. But he's spinning quite a story." A week later, there was a knock at my cottage door. 2 police officers stood on the porch, looking uncomfortable. "Diane Reynolds?" the older officer asked. My heart pounded. "Yes, we're conducting a wellness check. Your son, Brandon Reynolds, reported you missing from Massachusetts, says he's concerned about your mental state." I invited them in, showed my ID, and explained I'd relocated voluntarily after a family dispute involving financial exploitation. I showed them the police report I'd filed in Boston and the restraining order. "I'm not missing," I concluded. "I'm starting over." The younger officer nodded sympathetically. "We'll report that you're safe and well, ma'am. Your actual location remains confidential unless there's a formal legal proceeding requiring disclosure." After they left, I sat shaking on my sofa. Brandon had found me, or at least found the general area. He knew I was in Maine. The walls closed in a little. Through Ruth, I learned Brandon's narrative was evolving. Now, I had supposedly promised to pay Heather's debts as a wedding gift, then gone senile and forgotten the promise. He was posting old photos of us on social media with captions like, "Missing my mom. Please contact us if you've seen her. We're so worried." The performative concern made me physically ill. While publicly playing the devoted son, he was privately escalating his efforts. He'd gone to my house in Boston, using his key to enter, and discovered some of my possessions missing. He filed a police report claiming I'd been the victim of a robbery. He contacted my former colleagues, suggesting I might be experiencing cognitive decline and asking if they'd noticed anything concerning before my retirement. Most disturbing was his encounter with Ruth at the local supermarket. He'd accidentally run into her in the produce section and spent 20 minutes describing how devastated he and Heather were about my abandonment. As Ruth was leaving, Heather's parents approached her, demanding to know where their daughter's financial support had gone. "They made a scene right there by the checkout," Ruth told me, "saying you'd stolen their retirement by promising to help Brandon and Heather, and then disappearing." It was mortifying. Brandon had even created a social media campaign with the hashtag #FindDiane, sharing it among family and friends. "Mom's been acting strangely since retirement," he wrote. "We're concerned she may be experiencing early-onset dementia and have wandered off confused. Please help us bring her home safely." The comments were filled with sympathy for the devoted son searching for his confused mother. My cousin Janet had shared it widely, adding, "Diane hasn't been herself lately. So sad to see this happening to such a vibrant woman." Despite the ongoing drama back in Boston, I found myself settling into Rockport life. My neighbor, Florence, an 80-year-old retired English professor, became a regular visitor, bringing homemade soup and sharp observations about human nature. "Men like your son," she said one evening after I'd finally shared more of my story, "count on women's conditioning to forgive, to make peace, to smooth things over at any cost. Breaking that pattern feels like a betrayal of your very identity as a mother." She was right. Each day I didn't respond to Brandon's messages felt like a failure of maternal duty. Each week I remained disappeared seemed like an admission that I'd raised a son I now needed to hide from. But each day also brought small victories. I joined a community garden. I learned to identify local birds. I made casual friendships at the bookstore and the cafe down the street. I opened a checking account under my legal name, no longer needing the alias, as I established myself in town. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I started to heal from the deep wound of Brandon's betrayal. I wasn't just Diane the mother anymore. I was becoming Diane the person, with interests, friendships, and a life independent of maternal identity. It didn't stop the pain, but it gave me something equally valuable: perspective. 3 months into my new life in Rockport, a certified letter arrived at my P.O. box. It was from Brandon's attorney, Prentice and Morris LLC, informing me that my son was filing suit for breach of verbal contract and promised financial support. The letter demanded I contact them immediately to resolve this matter without further legal proceedings. I forwarded it to Sarah Jenkins, who responded the same day. "Standard intimidation tactic," she assured me. "They're hoping you'll panic and settle. We're not going to do that." Sarah had been working diligently on my behalf, compiling evidence of Brandon's identity theft and attempted unauthorized access to my accounts. She documented the pattern of financial exploitation and filed the necessary reports to clear my name from the fraudulent accounts. Now she went on the offensive, responding to Brandon's attorney with a detailed countersuit threat for fraud, identity theft, breaking and entering, and elder financial abuse. "Their lawsuit is built on sand," she explained. "Yours is built on documented evidence. They're counting on you being too embarrassed or intimidated to fight back. That's how financial abusers operate. They rely on victims' silence." 2 weeks later, another certified letter arrived, this time indicating Brandon was indeed proceeding with the lawsuit. A court date was set for 3 months later in Suffolk County, Massachusetts. I would need to return to Boston to testify. The thought of facing Brandon in court terrified me. I'd been having nightmares already. Dreams where I was trapped in my old house while Brandon and Heather methodically emptied it, taking even the walls and floors until I stood in an empty frame with nowhere to hide. Meanwhile, The identity theft investigation had uncovered even more accounts opened in my name. Brandon had been applying for credit cards using my information for over 2 years, starting small and gradually increasing the amounts as each card was maxed out. The total fraudulent debt now exceeded $150,000 across multiple accounts. My credit score, once an impeccable 820, had plummeted to 580. The credit bureaus were working to remove the fraudulent accounts, but the process was painfully slow. The legal and financial consequences of Brandon's actions would take years to fully resolve. Ruth called regularly, keeping me updated on family developments. Brandon had escalated his concerned son performance, now suggesting to relatives that I might have early-onset Alzheimer's. He'd even contacted my former doctor, who thankfully refused to discuss my medical information due to privacy laws. Most of the family sees through it, Ruth assured me. Janet's still taken in, but everyone else is starting to question Brandon's story, especially since he and Heather are still living so lavishly despite their supposed financial crisis. As the court date approached, Sarah worked with me to prepare my testimony. We gathered bank statements, credit reports, police reports, and phone records documenting Brandon's escalating patterns of financial exploitation. Ruth agreed to testify about what she'd witnessed, including Brandon's admission that he'd taken my house key without permission. My former colleague Malcolm provided a sworn statement about the fraudulent accounts and attempted unauthorized retirement account access. Even my former neighbor in Boston, Mrs. Cavendish, submitted an affidavit about seeing Brandon and Heather entering my house early in the morning when they knew I was normally at my water aerobics class. In a surprising development, Sarah received a call from Heather's sister Jessica, who had seen Brandon's social media campaign and found it suspicious. Heather told me months ago they were planning to get the old lady's money, Jessica reported. She bragged about how they were setting up some kind of legal trap. I thought she was exaggerating, but now I'm worried they're really trying to steal from Diane. Jessica agreed to provide a sworn statement and potentially testify if needed. A week before the court date, Brandon's attorney contacted Sarah directly, attempting to bypass proper channels. My client is willing to drop the lawsuit if Mrs. Reynolds agrees to pay a settlement of $200,000, the attorney proposed. This would save everyone the unpleasantness of a public court proceeding. Sarah was furious. They're not supposed to contact you directly when you have legal representation, she told me. It's an ethical violation, and the settlement offer is revealing. They know their case is weak, so they're trying to intimidate you into paying before a judge can throw it out. Despite the mounting evidence in my favor, returning to Boston terrified me. Florence insisted on driving me to the bus station the day before the court appearance. Stand tall, she advised as we waited for the bus. Remember, you're not just fighting for your money. You're fighting for your dignity and for every other parent who's been exploited by their children. The bus ride to Boston gave me too much time to think. I watched familiar landmarks appear as we approached the city, each one triggering memories. The park where I'd pushed Brandon on the swings, the ice cream shop where we'd celebrated his elementary school graduation, the community college where I'd taken night classes to advance my career while he was young. This city held my entire history as a mother. Now I was returning not as Brandon's proud parent, but as his legal adversary. Ruth met me at the bus station and hugged me tightly. "You look good," she said. "Maine agrees with you." "I'm terrified," I admitted as we drove to her house, where I'd stay during the proceedings. "You should be," she replied pragmatically. "But being terrified and doing the right thing anyway is the definition of courage, isn't it?" That night, I barely slept, rehearsing my testimony and imagining Brandon's reaction when he saw me. Would he show remorse? Would he hate me for fighting back? Would I see any remnant of the boy I'd raised in the man who now saw me only as a financial resource to be exploited? The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. I dressed carefully in a conservative blue suit I'd had delivered to Ruth's house, not wanting to appear in court looking like I'd been living as a coastal Maine retiree. Sarah met us at the courthouse steps, her confident presence steadying my nerves. "Remember," she said as we entered the building, "you've done nothing wrong. You're the victim here, not the perpetrator." I nodded, though my dry mouth and pounding heart suggested otherwise. As we approached the courtroom, I saw them. Brandon and Heather, huddled with their attorney. Brandon looked up, catching my eye. For just a moment, I saw shock register on his face. Perhaps he hadn't expected me to actually appear. Perhaps he'd convinced himself I truly had experienced cognitive decline and wouldn't be able to defend myself. Or perhaps he was just surprised by how different I looked after 6 months away. Thinner, tanner, my hair cut shorter and now showing its natural gray instead of the colored brown I'd maintained for years. Whatever the case, that flash of surprise quickly hardened into something cold and calculating as he whispered to his attorney. The transformation was chilling. Watching my son shift into battle mode against his own mother, I straightened my spine and walked past them without acknowledgement. Whatever happened today, I was no longer the woman who could be manipulated by maternal guilt. I was fighting for my future. And I was ready. Courtroom 4C in the Suffolk County Courthouse was smaller than I'd imagined from television dramas. The hard wooden benches, the flags flanking the judge's bench, the subtle scent of furniture polish, it all seemed designed to intimidate. I sat beside Sarah at the defendant's table, acutely aware of Brandon and Heather directly behind us with their attorney, a sleek man in an expensive suit. The whispered conversations around us fell silent as Judge Eleanor Ramirez entered and the bailiff called the court to order. Case number 2023CV4187, Brandon Reynolds versus Diane Reynolds, the clerk announced. Complaint of breach of verbal contract and unlawful withdrawal of promised financial support. Judge Ramirez, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, reviewed the paperwork before addressing the room. I've read both the complaint and the counterclaim. This appears to be a family matter that has unfortunately escalated to litigation. Let's proceed with opening statements. Brandon's attorney, Mr. Donovan, presented their case first. According to him, I had verbally promised to help Brandon and Heather with significant financial challenges as part of a pattern of parental support established throughout Brandon's life. He claimed my abrupt disappearance after making this promise constituted abandonment and breach of contract, causing significant emotional and financial distress to the plaintiffs. Mrs. Reynolds has a history of providing financial assistance to her son, Donovan argued smoothly. College tuition, wedding expenses, help with their first home down payment. The plaintiffs reasonably expected this support to continue when they approached her about their debt situation. Mrs. Reynolds initially agreed to help, then disappeared without warning, cutting off all contact and abandoning not just her promise but her entire family. It was a masterful distortion of reality, painting Brandon and Heather as victims of a capricious, possibly mentally unstable mother who had cruelly withdrawn promised support. Sarah's opening statement cut through the fabrication with surgical precision. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of broken promises but a clear pattern of elder financial abuse. The plaintiff didn't approach his mother for help. He and his wife orchestrated a systematic campaign of exploitation, including identity theft, unauthorized account access, and using intimidation tactics to attempt to extract money from Mrs. Reynolds' retirement savings. Mrs. Reynolds didn't disappear. She relocated for her safety after the plaintiff illegally entered her home using a copied key and attempted to access her financial documents. The evidence phase began with Brandon taking the stand. Under Donovan's careful questioning, he portrayed himself as a devoted son blindsided by his mother's erratic behavior. He described my supposed verbal agreement to help with their debts, painting a picture of a mother who had always helped financially and had explicitly promised to continue doing so. She told us not to worry, Brandon testified, his voice convincingly sincere. She said, family comes first, and promised to help us clean up the debt situation. Then she just vanished without a word. We were frantic with worry. During cross-examination, Sarah methodically dismantled his narrative. She presented bank records showing my consistent financial support throughout his life, contrasted with his lack of reciprocal support as an adult. She introduced the police report about the fraudulent accounts and identity theft. Most devastatingly, she played a voicemail Brandon had left on my phone. You'll regret it if you don't help us. We know where your money is, and we'll get it one way or another. Brandon's composed facade cracked. That was taken out of context, he protested. I was upset. Anyone would be upset if their mother abandoned them. Abandoned? Sarah repeated. Mr. Reynolds, how old are you? 32. And were you physically or financially dependent on your mother prior to making these demands? That's not the point. It is precisely the point, Sarah countered. Your mother raised you to adulthood, put you through college debt-free, helped with your wedding and home down payment. At what point does her obligation to bankroll your lifestyle end? When Heather took the stand, she appeared in a conservative outfit that couldn't quite disguise the designer handbag she carried or the new diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. Sarah noted these details subtly in her questioning. "That's a lovely bracelet, Mrs. Reynolds. Is it new?" "It was a gift," Heather replied defensively. "From whom?" "Brandon gave it to me for our anniversary last month." "Interesting." "So, despite claiming financial distress severe enough to require your mother-in-law's entire retirement savings, your husband purchased a diamond bracelet for an anniversary gift?" Judge Ramirez interrupted. "Counsel, please stay focused on the relevant issues." "Your Honor, the plaintiff's spending habits are directly relevant to their claim of financial necessity," Sarah responded, and the judge allowed her to continue. "My testimony came next." Sarah had prepared me well, advising me to stick to facts and specific incidents rather than emotional interpretations. I described my lifetime of financial support for Brandon, the shocking discovery of his identity theft, the early morning intrusion into my home, and the escalating threats that led me to relocate for my safety. "I never promised to pay their debts," I stated firmly. "I said I needed time to think and would consult my attorney." Brandon and Heather interpreted that as a yes and began telling family members I had already agreed. When I didn't immediately comply, the pressure tactics began. During cross-examination, Donovan tried to paint me as a resentful mother who had abandoned her son out of spite. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Reynolds, that you left without telling anyone where you were going? That you cut off contact with your only child? What kind of mother does that?" I took a deep breath before responding. "The kind who has been threatened, manipulated, and stolen from by that child. The kind who needed to protect herself from financial exploitation. The kind who finally realized that continuing to enable destructive behavior isn't love, it's codependence." Ruth testified next, describing Brandon's behavior at family gatherings, his admission about copying my house key, and the scene with Heather's parents at the supermarket. Malcolm provided expert testimony about the financial aspects of the case, explaining the evidence of identity theft and attempted retirement account access. The surprise witness was Heather's sister Jessica. She testified that Heather had explicitly discussed their plan to extract money from me months before they approached me about the debt. She called it Operation Retirement Fund, Jessica testified. She said Brandon's mom was sitting on a gold mine between her house equity and retirement accounts. They planned to pressure her into helping with their debts, then discover more debts later, after she was already committed. Brandon's face darkened with fury during this testimony. I saw him whisper angrily to Heather, who looked close to tears. Real ones this time. Judge Ramirez called a brief recess before closing arguments. In the hallway, I avoided eye contact with Brandon and Heather, staying close to Sarah and Ruth. But I could feel Brandon's glare from across the corridor, his anger palpable. When court resumed, the closing arguments were brief. Donovan did his best with a significantly weakened case, emphasizing the pattern of parental support and suggesting that my counter-allegations were exaggerated responses to a simple family misunderstanding. Sarah's closing was devastating in its simplicity. "Your Honor, this case represents a textbook example of elder financial abuse disguised as familial obligation. Mrs. Reynolds worked hard her entire life, raising her son alone after her husband's death and carefully saving for retirement. The plaintiff's claim essentially argues that a parent's obligation to provide financial support never ends. That Mrs. Reynolds should sacrifice her financial security and retirement to bail out her adult son from debts incurred through reckless spending. More disturbingly, the evidence clearly shows escalating patterns of exploitation, from identity theft to intimidation tactics. Mrs. Reynolds didn't abandon her son. She protected herself from his predatory behavior. Judge Ramirez took only 30 minutes to return with her decision. The courtroom fell silent as she delivered her ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I find in favor of the defendant, Diane Reynolds. There is insufficient evidence of any verbal contract or promised financial support. Rather, the evidence strongly suggests the plaintiff engaged in a pattern of financial exploitation against his mother. She looked directly at Brandon. Mr. Reynolds, I am dismissing your case with prejudice and referring the identity theft evidence to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. I strongly suggest you seek both financial counseling and psychological help for what appears to be a profound sense of entitlement and disturbing lack of boundaries. Brandon stood abruptly. This is bullshit. She owes us. After everything we've done for her. Sit down, Mr. Reynolds, Judge Ramirez commanded. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Brandon sat, his face contorted with rage. Heather was openly crying now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks. Court is adjourned, Judge Ramirez announced, banging her gavel. As we gathered our belongings, I finally allowed myself to make eye contact with Brandon. The hatred in his expression made me physically recoil. This wasn't my son anymore. Perhaps he never truly had been the person I thought I'd raised. This isn't over, he hissed as we passed. You'll regret this. Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright Boston sunshine, Sarah hugged me. It's a complete victory, Diane. And with the judge's referral to the DA, Brandon will likely be facing criminal charges for the identity theft. I don't feel victorious, I admitted, watching Brandon and Heather storm to their car across the parking lot. I feel hollow. That's normal, Sarah assured me. You've won the battle, but lost something precious in the process. Allow yourself to grieve that loss. Ruth drove me back to her house, where I would stay one more night before returning to Rockport. Do you think he meant it? I asked her. That it isn't over? Brandon's always been all talk when he doesn't get his way, Ruth said. Remember his tantrums as a kid? But now he's facing potential criminal charges. I think his focus will shift to saving himself rather than pursuing you further. I hoped she was right. But as I packed my small overnight bag the next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that this legal victory, necessary as it was, had permanently severed whatever tenuous connection remained between me and my only child. I had protected myself, but at what cost? The answer would have to wait. For now, I had a bus to catch. Back to my new life in Rockport. Back to the peaceful existence I'd built from the ashes of my old one. Back to a future that looked nothing like I'd imagined, but was entirely my own. 6 months after the court case, autumn painted Rockport in brilliant oranges and reds. My small cottage had become truly home, with Professor claiming the best spots in each room, and my books filling the built-in shelves. I'd added touches that were uniquely me. Artwork from local artists, a bird feeder outside my kitchen window, herbs growing on the windowsill. The bookstore had become the center of my social life. Elaine had increased my hours, putting me in charge of the newly expanded mystery section and the monthly book club. I'd made genuine friends, not just Florence next door, but Margot the retired nurse, Daniel the lighthouse keeper, and Jessie who ran the bakery down the street. People who knew me as Diane, not as Brandon's mother. The legal aftermath had been exactly as exhausting as Sarah warned. Brandon faced criminal charges for identity theft and unauthorized account access. Rather than face trial, he accepted a plea deal, probation, mandatory financial counseling, and full restitution of the fraudulently obtained funds. The agreement required monthly payments to me over 5 years, though I hadn't received the first payment yet. Through Ruth, I learned that the fallout had been significant. Heather had filed for divorce 3 months after the court case, unwilling to weather the financial constraints of probation and restitution. She'd moved back in with her parents, taking most of their furniture and leaving Brandon with the debt-laden condo he could no longer afford. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only sadness for what could have been and wasn't. My own healing progressed in fits and starts. Some days I felt strong and confident in my new life. Others found me looking at old photos, wondering where I'd gone wrong as a mother, how I'd raised a son capable of such calculated exploitation. My therapist, Dr. Wilson, helped me work through the complicated grief of losing a child who was still alive but no longer part of my life. You're mourning multiple losses, she explained. The son you thought you had. The future relationship you'd envisioned. Your identity as an actively involved mother. And your sense of family legacy. It's a profound grief. Slowly, I rebuilt my financial security, The fraudulent accounts were removed from my credit report, though my score was still recovering. I sold my Boston house, using the proceeds to purchase my small Rockport cottage outright and reinvest the remainder for retirement. The financial security I'd worked so hard to create was damaged but not destroyed. One crisp October morning, I received an email from Brandon. My heart raced as I opened it, unsure what new demands or accusations it might contain. "Mom," it began simply. "I've been in therapy since the court case. My counselor thinks I should write to you as part of my recovery process. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just need to acknowledge what I did. I took advantage of your love and generosity. I stole from you, lied to you, and tried to manipulate you into sacrificing your future for my mistakes. When you wouldn't comply, I threatened and intimidated you. I betrayed everything you taught me about honesty and responsibility. There's no excuse for what I did. I could blame it on Heather's influence or financial pressure or entitlement issues from my upbringing. But the truth is simpler. I made selfish choices. I saw you as a resource rather than a person with your own needs and rights. I'm not asking you to respond. I understand why you wouldn't want to. I just wanted you to know that I'm facing what I did and trying to become someone better than I've been. Brandon." I read the email 7 times, analyzing every word, searching for hidden manipulation or subtle blame shifting. It wasn't a complete acceptance of responsibility. The mention of entitlement issues from my upbringing stung, but it was more acknowledgement than I'd expected to ever receive. After careful consideration, I composed a brief reply. "Brandon, thank you for your email. I appreciate your acknowledgement of what happened between us. I hope your therapy continues to be productive and that you find healthier patterns moving forward. I've built a new life that brings me peace and purpose. While I'm not ready for direct contact, I'm open to hearing about your progress through your Aunt Ruth. If you wish to share updates with her, take care, Mom." It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. That might come later. Or it might not. It was acknowledgement of his small step toward accountability and a tiny opening. Not to resume our former relationship, but perhaps to build something new someday if his changes proved genuine and lasting. That evening, I hosted the Bookstore's monthly mystery club meeting at my cottage. 8 of us gathered around my living room, debating plot twists and character motivations over wine and cheese. Florence brought her famous apple cake. Daniel contributed fresh oysters he'd harvested that morning, and Margot wore the reading glasses I'd helped her pick out at the shop downtown. These people knew bits and pieces of my story, enough to understand I'd left behind a difficult family situation, not enough to define me by it. They knew me for my book recommendations, my volunteer work at the senior center, my newfound passion for coastal gardening. They valued me for who I was now, not for my role as someone's mother. After everyone left, I walked down to the harbor. The full moon silvered the water, boats gently rocking at their moorings. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this life. I'd defined myself entirely as Brandon's mother, measuring my worth by his happiness and success, sacrificing my needs for his wants, confusing enabling with love. The painful lesson I'd learned through all this was that real love, for others and for oneself, requires boundaries. It demands respect flowing in both directions. It recognizes the difference between helping and rescuing, between supporting and enabling. I still loved my son. I always would. But I'd learned to love myself too. As I walked home along the moonlit path, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't. Not because the pain was gone, it lingered. But because I'd discovered strength I never knew I had. I'd faced my greatest fear, losing my child's love, and survived it. I'd rebuilt my life from scratch at an age when most people are settling into familiar routines. My cottage windows glowed warmly as I approached. Professor waited in the window, his orange face a beacon guiding me home. Tomorrow would bring book club preparations, a lunch date with Florence, and a webinar about coastal garden planning for spring. Simple pleasures in a life that was entirely mine to shape. It wasn't the future I'd planned. It was better. It was authentic. It was free. I hope my story resonates with those of you who've had to make difficult choices to protect yourselves, even from those you love most. Have you ever had to establish boundaries with family members? What gave you the strength to stand up for yourself when it was hardest? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might give someone else the courage they need right now. Don't forget to subscribe if this story touched you, and hit that like button to help others find it too. Thank you so much for listening to my journey from betrayal to freedom. Remember, it's never too late to start over and reclaim your life. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.